Welcome to No Instructions Needed, where I walk you through playing your board game. All you need to do is open your box and play along. Today we're going through Lord of the Rings, the card game. The object of the game is to make progress on a quest, which is kind of like going on a journey. You have cards like this, which have a number of points that need to be accumulated, and you put them on the card. And meanwhile, enemies are trying to stop you. So you battle the enemies and try to make progress on the quest. So first, a very quick understanding of the elements of the game. There is a player deck here, noted by the ring, and the Eye of Sauron on the back of those cards that have that backing. That's the encounter cards. There are quest cards. They're easily found because they don't have a real back to them that's unique. There's a player counter token, and that's for multiple player games. This game can be played in solitaire or single player mode, or also in multiple player mode. And this token is passed around when you have multiple players playing. Then you have damage tokens, resource tokens, and quest tokens. The other thing that you have is a threat tracker, and that is really to help determine whether the enemies will engage you, and also if you become overwhelmed and the game is over. So first we want to separate all of the encounter cards from the player cards, and also pull out all of the quest cards. So go ahead and pause and get that done. Okay, once you have that done, the next thing that we want to do is decide on what quest we're going to go on. Now, the very first one that's proposed in the instructions is the passage through Mirkwood. That has a difficulty level of 1, and so it's really the one that we want to start with. So what we're going to do is there should be 4 cards for Passage of Mirkwood, and go ahead and separate those from the other quest cards. Now, if you look at the card, the side A of the card, you'll notice that there is a tree, the Mirkwood tree, the symbol for Mirkwood, the orc, and a spider. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the encounter deck, and we're going to pull out all the cards that have the symbol over here. We want that to be either the Mirkwood tree, the orc, or the spider. Here's one technique that's helpful in separating out the cards. If you'll notice, the symbol that identifies the type of card is on the right-hand side. Now, I happen to be right-handed, so if I'm moving through the cards, that symbol is kind of covered up. So if I flip the card upside down, though, I can more quickly sort the cards because that symbol is on the left-hand side if they're upside down. So that's just a technique that can apply for both of the enemy and the player cards, because the player, again, if I have it, and there you go, you've got the Gandalf card that doesn't have a symbol on it, so he's easy to find. But I find that a fast way to help me separate the cards. So your encounter deck should look much smaller now. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go through the player cards, and we're going to separate out those. Now what you'll find is in the player cards, there are some of them that have a green coloring to them. Notice there's a ball over here, and there's a kind of book over there. So there's green colored ones, there's purple, and there's blue, and then there's red. So go ahead and separate those out into those different colors. And there will be a few cards that, I think 4 of them, that do not have a color, and those will be the Gandalf cards. So separate out the Gandalf cards as well. Okay, so once you've separated the cards, it should look something like this, with the different colors. And the quest cards, the encounter cards, and the ones for Gandalf. Now, as you look at the different colors, you'll find that depending upon whether you've played before or not, that certain cards have the word hero on them. They may be on the top of or bottom of your deck, depending upon how you've got them organized or buried somewhere in. Others may not. So each of the colors will have 3 heroes associated with them. So go ahead right now and pull out the heroes for each of the different colors and make sure that they're on the top. Now, the different colors represent what's called spheres of influence in the game, and you can see that on page 4 of the instructions. Now, there are 4 Gandalf cards because there's one for each of the different spheres of influence, the teams, if you will. And so we give a Gandalf card to each one of those different colors. So now the next thing, if you need to decide if you've got multiple players, which color each player is going to have. Now, even though all 4 colors are in the base game is really only designed for 1 or 2 players. You actually have to have 2 sets in order to play with 3 or 4 players. But right now, go ahead and decide which color you want. Each color has a different play style or different capabilities. Like the red, for example, is the fighter. The green has knowledge. So how they interact differs, and you can best know that by playing. So just pick a color and let's get started here. Once you've got your cards properly separated and you've chosen a color for each player that's going to be playing, you need to put your heroes out in front of you. You need to shuffle all of the cards of your color. In this case, I'm using the purple color, the leadership. And also in your player cards, you want to make sure that you've got 1 Gandalf in there and it's all shuffled. The passage through Mirkwood encounter cards all need to be shuffled. And then the passage through Mirkwood scenario cards need to be here with in order, so that you've got 1A, 2A, and then both 3As. You also need to have all your tokens out, and you can just move them to the side once you've got them in some location that's easy to reach. And then you set your threat counter to the sum of the threat cost for each of the hero players. Next, you determine who will be the first player and place the first player token next to that player. Of course, you only do that if you have more than 1 player. You can play in solitaire mode. Then you want to draw the top 6 cards off of your player deck. Here I have these 6 cards. And if you don't like them, you can take a mulligan, which means that you shuffle those back into the deck and take the next 6. You can only do that when you're first starting, and you have to keep the second hand if you do that mulligan. The next thing you want to do is take the scenario card and look at it. There may be some setup instructions. So for the passage through Mirkwood, what we need to do is search through the encounter deck for 1 copy of the Forest Spider and 1 copy of the Old Forest Road and add them to the staging area. Then shuffle the encounter deck. So we do that, and then we'll turn it over to 1B. So here are the 2 cards. The Forest Spider is, of course, an enemy, and the Old Forest Road is a location. Now, in the Lord of the Rings, the card game, the objective is to go through a quest. And here on 1B, we see that we have 8 quest points. And so you make progress. Your goal is to make progress on the quest, and whenever you reach those 8 quest points, you advance to the next card. And it's the enemies that are trying to stop you. So now we place those 2 cards down in the staging area. That's not a very thematic name for it, so you can kind of think of it as the shadows of the road that you're traveling on or something like that. But in any case, you place them down in that area between the players. Now we're ready to begin playing the game, and it happens in a number of different rounds. So at the beginning of each round, you take resource tokens and put add one resource token to each of the players' pools. And you draw 1 card from your player deck. If you are out of player cards, you don't draw an extra one. So that's the end of the resource phase. Now, and you can play actions. So cards, some cards have the word action on it, and depending upon what card that you have, you may be able to play an action at the end of your resource phase. Actions are considered an advanced topic, so if you want to do just basic gameplay, you don't have to use the actions. The next phase is the planning phase. So here we have one type of card, which is an ally card. And here's another card, which is an attachment card. And so in the planning phase, you will do things such as play your ally cards or your attachment cards. Now, at the top of these cards, each of these cards is a cost. And so you have to pay for them out of your resource pool. Now, in the basic set, all of the cards are just the same color. So here, purple. And if you look over here, this is the sphere of influence is purple. And so you have to pay for these cards with the resources in a matching color sphere of influence. Now, all of these are purple, so any of these could pay together. So, for example, let's say that I wanted to play this Snowborn Scout. What I would want to do is I have to pay 1 for that, and so I might say Glowin might pay the resource for that, and we play that ally down here and return the resource to the bank. If I wanted to use this Steward of Gondor attachment card, I have to pay 2. Now, no hero has 2 resources, but we can use both of these to pay for the resource and then place it down and attach it. So I'm going to attach it to Theodred right here. Now, some cards don't have any cost. Those are typically cards that have actions that you would play in the middle of a battle or a quest. Other types of actions or events may have a cost. You wouldn't play them right now, but whenever that event is appropriate, then you would pay the cost. Of course, you would have to have a token there. Now, one important point to notice is that even though there is no cost for this particular action here, or event, I still have to have a token that matches his sphere of influence. So here I could not play this card because I don't have any resource tokens. So even though it doesn't cost anything, we have to have at least 1 token that matches that sphere of influence. So that would end my turn right now because I'm out of tokens and there's not more that I can do. If I have some actions, I could play actions at this particular time. And here, this is like the first player. So the first player does this planning, and then the next player does their planning. The next phase is the quest phase. And this is the essential essence of the game. We are trying to make progress on our quest. Now, as I take these cards from the staging area just to show you, these cards at the top of them have this threat value here. And the sum of them that we have here is 2 for this enemy card and 1 for this location. So that's a total of 3. In order to make progress on your quest, we have to have a willpower greater than the threat. So for example, at each of the cards that we have has a willpower that's shown by this round circle here. So here we have Aragorn, and he has a willpower of 2. Now, my heroes altogether have 2 plus 1 plus 2, a total of 5 willpower, compared to 3 threat here. So we would, if we committed all 3 heroes to the quest, we would make a progress of 2. Notice that this ally has no willpower, so he cannot really aid in that quest. So he's mainly in there for defense. There's no real attack. He's just for defense, and we'll talk more about that later. Now here's the whole challenge. You have to commit characters to a quest in order to make progress, and you would do that by what they call exhausting. That is, you turn the character sideways. If that character is committed to the quest, he can make progress, but he cannot attack or defend. And so the next point about that is, for every point that is the willpower is less, you do a comparison. So the threat value here is 3, and the total willpower, if I commit all of these, would be 5. And so we would make progress. But if I don't commit any of these, then I have a threat of 3, and so those, I would have to increase my threat tracker by a total of 3, going to a total of 32. So that's the challenge, is you're trying to make progress on your quest, but you have enemies that you need to fight. The other challenge is that after you have committed to the quest, you will reveal one encounter card per player. And so each of those encounter cards is going to have some kind of threat. So you have to decide how much you want to commit to the quest and how much you want to prepare for defense. That's the whole challenge of the game. So go ahead and think through what you want to do. So for my turn, I decide that I will commit both Theodred and Glóin to the quest. So that will give me a willpower of 2 plus 1, 3. Then the next thing that happens is the next player decides which players they want to commit to the quest. After everyone has committed to the quest, then you reveal one encounter card per player. Now in this one, I happen to have drawn this Dol Guldur orcs. They have a willpower, a threat of 2, but they also have this when revealed. Now, for a basic game, you don't have to use any of these kinds of items here. There's this thing's called shadow effects, the actions, this when revealed, a number of these issues. So in the basic one, you don't have to use these. But in the advanced game, it says when revealed, the first player chooses one character currently committed to the quest and deal 2 damage to that character. So since I've just revealed that, I'm going to choose one of these characters to take 2 points of damage. I'll do Theodred here. So I add 2 damage points to that particular character. Now, the next thing that you can do is you can play some actions if those are appropriate. If you have something in your hand that is appropriate, but remember that you have to pay for them if you need to. Now we resolve the questing. The way you do that is you go to the threat of everything in the staging area. That's, in my case, it happens to be 1 plus 2 plus 2, a total of 5, and you compare that to the willpower of the characters that are committed to the quest. So I have a total of 3. So the threat is greater than my willpower by 2. So now I need to increase my threat dial by 2. So that would be 31. If you make progress, you can place the progress token on the quest card. So so in this first part of Passage Through Mirkwood, there's a total of 8 that we need to make progress, and when that happens, you move to the next card. If I happen to make more progress than this card shows, so for example, let's say that I had 7 and I achieve my progress of 2, we don't add the additional progress to the next card. We just lose that additional progress. So go ahead and resolve your questing, and you can play player actions after that. The next phase is the travel phase. Now, as we mentioned, some of the cards are location cards, and those location cards do have a threat. If that threat happens to be fairly high, then you may want to put it into the travel to that location. And it will no longer, since it's no longer in the staging area, it doesn't contribute to the threat against your quest. So that's one reason for traveling to a location. Another reason is that if you're playing in the advanced version, again, for the basic version, you can ignore responses and actions and things, but you can have a response that is helpful to your quest. That's another reason for traveling to a particular location. Now, there's one of the caveats or the challenge about traveling to a place is that any progress that I make on a quest needs to go against the traveled location before I can apply it to my quest as a whole. So here I'm trying to make progress on this first flies and spiders, total of 8, and so if I travel to this location, I have to make progress of 3 before I can start contributing back to my main quest. The additional thing is that if I want to travel to a location, I can only travel to 1. So if I have a location that I have not completed my travel in, I cannot move another location in. So I'm going to decide not to travel to that location. So go ahead and decide what you want to do in your traveling. And you can play player actions after your travel. So pretty much at the end of every phase you can do player actions. So the next phase is the encounter phase. That's where we determine which of these enemies up here will engage our characters. We don't actually combat at that time, we just find out which enemies do engage. Now, the threat tracker is very important here because that is going to determine which enemies will engage you. And this number that we have over here at the top of enemy cards, it's called a threat cost, but you might think of it as patience or threat tolerance just to keep a more thematic way of thinking about it, because the higher the number, the less likely that this enemy will engage you. Now, for my particular team, we have a pretty high threat. So this enemy has a threat tolerance of 25, and the other enemy has a threat tolerance of 10. So both of these players are willing to engage me. So I'm kind of in trouble. But before we determine which particular enemies are going to engage with us automatically, we can choose to explicitly engage with an enemy. That can be advantageous sometimes. I'm going to choose not to. Once I've made my choices, then the other player makes his choices, and you can play player actions. So go ahead and choose which enemies, if any, that you're going to engage. Okay, so the second part of the encounter phase is to determine which enemies are going to engage you automatically. So the way that you do that is you compare your threat tracker, again mine's 31 here, and you look at all of the enemies and you pick the enemy that has the highest threat but still less than your threat tracker. And so that one happens to be the forest spider. And so this forest spider would engage with me. Now, you might want to look here. Again, if you're playing the advanced, you have these actions. And so here, this one, the forest spider says after the forest spider engages a player, it gets +1 attack until the end of the round. Ooh, not great. But again, if you're playing basic, you can ignore that. But this spider is going to engage with me. Now, the next step that happens is the other player, if you're playing with multiple players, the other player does engagement costs. So if we were having multiple players, this enemy, the Dol-Galur orcs, would engage with the other player. But since I'm playing in solitaire mode, that enemy will also engage with me. And we would continue to do that until we've checked each of the different enemies to see whether they engage any of the players. And again, that concludes the engagement phase, and so you can make player actions. So go ahead and give that a try. The next thing to do is to place one card from the encounter deck face down on each of the attacking enemies. This is for the advanced play, and this is called a shadow effect. So again, if you're playing the basic, you don't need to do this. Now you can do some player actions. And so what I'm going to do is several player actions. I'm going to come to the Steward of Gondor, and it has an action, and that action allows me to exhaust the Steward of Gondor and add 2 resource to the attached heroes resource pool. So I'm going to exhaust that and add 2 resource. And the reason that I want to do that is because I want to play some other cards. So the event that I want to happen, the action I want to do, is I want to put one ally card into play from my hand, and at the end of the phase, if that ally is still in play, return it to my hand. So that costs 1. So I will pay 1 resource. I will discard this action, and I will put this player, Faramir, into play. Running out of a little bit of room, so it's a little bit hard to see, but I'll show you that he's in play here. So go ahead and do any actions that you have. The next step is to determine which enemy is going to attack first. I'm going to go ahead and say that the forest spider is going to attack first, and once I've determined that, I have to declare a defender. Now, if I don't defend this attack, then any hit points that happen have to be applied completely to one hero. So, for example, this one is attacking with 2, plus it has a 1, an additional 1, so it attacks with 3. And so any hit points would have to be applied to a single hero. So I'm going to defend against that attack, and I'm going to have Snowborn Scout defend. So what I do is I turn him sideways to defend, to exhaust, and so that's declared that defender. Now when you're declaring who your defender is, you cannot have multiple players defend against the same enemy. So each enemy that's attacking, there's only one player that can be a defender. Now what we do is we resolve the shadow effects. To do that, we turn over the card and we take a look at that. Now this particular card doesn't have any shadow effect, so that's good for me. But let me show you another card that does have a shadow effect and what that looks like. So the shadow effect is this underneath this skull with a line here, axis looks like. It has the word shadow, and it tells you what to do. And so some of these shadow effects can be pretty deadly. So take a look at your shadow effects and resolve your shadow effects. Again, remember, if you're playing in the basic game, you don't need to use the shadow effects. So now that we've resolved the shadow effects, we actually allow this enemy to attack, and we resolve the combat. So this enemy has an attack of 2, and the defender has a defense of 1. But remember that this enemy also had an additional 1, so he's got an attack of 3, and the defender has a defense of 1. So 3 minus 1 gives 2. My player has my character has 1 hit point, and so now this character has been defeated. So you can take him and put him in the discard pile. But no other damage points go to any other of the characters. So even though there's more hit points than that character can absorb, they don't go to the other characters. So go ahead and resolve your combat. Now we repeat that same process for my other enemies. I resolve the shadow effects. Again, in this case, I don't have a shadow effect going on, which is nice. I determine a defender, declare a defender for this enemy. He will be attacking with 2. So I will have Faramir defend that one. We then resolve the combat, attacking with 2, defending with 2, so no damage is applied. Now, after I've had all of the enemies, player number 1 has all of the enemies attack, then player 2 has resolved their enemy attacks. So go ahead and get that stage done. Now, after all players have had the enemies attack them, finally it's the chance for the player to attack their enemies. So I have only one character can attack, my Aragorn character, because all of the other characters are exhausted. So Aragorn has an attack value of 3, and he's going to attack. But I have to first declare which enemy we're going to attack. Now the Forest Spider has a defense of 1 and 4 hit points. The Orcs have a defense of 0 and 3 hit points. So I am going to attack the Orcs, and with an attack of 3, defense of 0, and 3 hit points, these Orcs are defeated, and they're returned to their discard pile. Now, even though only one character can defend against an enemy, multiple characters can attack the same enemy, as long as they're not exhausted already. And it is not required that the attacker be a hero. The attacker can be an ally. And so in this particular situation here, I have an attack of 2, an attack of 2, an attack of 3. So all 3 of these characters could attack this spider, the forest spider here. And we have here a total of 7 attacking 1 with 4 hit points, and the spider would be destroyed. Now, if you remember for Faramir, I had played a card that said, at the end of that phase, this player needs to be returned back to my hand, so I need to do that now. And now that we've finished all of the attacks, now you can do some player actions. The final phase of the round is the refresh phase. And in the refresh phase, we refresh all of the cards by setting them back to the ready position, turning them back vertically. And then the first player token goes to the next player if you're playing in the multiplayer scenario. The other thing that needs to happen is that your threat dial or threat meter tracker needs to be increased by 1. So that's all of the phases, and you just continue to do this until you either complete your quest or you're defeated. Page 22 explains how the game ends and how you can win in the scoring, and it also talks about quest advancement. When you have put enough quest tokens to match the number on the card, you immediately advance to the next stage. Now, if I have an extra quest token, it doesn't apply to the next stage. So we would just move this off and go to the next stage. Now here, this happens to be, we are again doing the passage through Mirkwood, and we have a 2A. That's just telling us the front part. You do any instructions if they happen to be there. In the passage to Mirkwood, there aren't any instructions. And then you can just go on to flip the card over to 2B, and now you'll have to do whatever it says, and the passage quest tokens that you'd have to achieve is 2 for that portion. Now, if you have players that are still active and you complete all of the quests, then you have won the game. You lose the game if you have not yet completed the quest and all of your heroes are eliminated. Or, the other way that you can lose is if your threat tracker gets to the level of 50. If a player is eliminated, then any enemies that are engaged with him are returned back to the staging area, and they keep all their damage tokens. The rest of the players will continue the quest to try to defeat the enemies and complete the quest. Now, page 22 does describe a scoring system if you actually wanted to keep score for your particular quest, and it shows you how to do that. And on the very back of the book, you have the ability to fill in the scores for any quest that you have done. On pages 30 and 31 of the instruction manuals, it has a nice layout of these phases. Again, it's the resource phase where you add the resource tokens, the planning phase where you add players from your hand and decide what attachments and allies you have. Then you do your questing, your traveling, then you encounter and combat, and finally refresh. And again, you have actions. You can play your actions within each of the phases. So, I hope you have a good time playing your game, and just rewind this if you need some more help in the individual steps. Have a good day.